Hello again, everyone. I am here today to do a flip through of this book of John Singer Sargent's Watercolors. This is a great retrospective of all of his watercolor works, although I'm sure there's more than what's shown in this book. But his watercolor style is so inspirational to me, and I really like the color palette that he uses. And his style is so expressive that you can kind of see how he does his watercolors. So that's kind of why I got this book and why I wanted to do sort of a little flip through / mini review of this book. I highly recommend this particular source book for watercolorists. So the book is huge, so I am not going to be able to show you every bit of it, but I am going to highlight some of the wonderful watercolors that are in here. And as with most art books, it talks about the artist's history, their use of watercolor. Like here's an example that's just beautiful. He did a lot of watercoloring in Switzerland, which I think also is why his works kind of appeal to me, because sort of the first vacation that I took was to Switzerland, where I got into watercolor painting plein air. So he really, this is Switzerland, and it's just beautiful and sort of aspirational for trying to get watercolors that look like that. And what I really like is that there is sort of a loose style to his painting, which is really lovely. And here, like, there's a lot of water used to kind of bleed the color, and it just looks really super cool. Although this is not, these are actually artists that inspired his works. And that is just lovely. And you can really see the brush strokes, which is kind of interesting, because normally with watercolor you can't always see the brush strokes from the artist, but here, like, you can tell he did wet and wet for the sky, and you can see where he laid down the little wisps. Same with the water, and I just love the color palette. And I think that watercolor has always kind of been viewed, or at least through history, and certainly in the earlier days like this, watercolor was viewed as, sort of a lesser skill, or a lesser end result. Oil painting was kind of where it was at. So the fact that he would be so expressive with watercolor this way, and really do a lot of works in watercolor, is a little bit unusual. He clearly liked the medium. So these are from Venice. Would love to go back to Venice and do watercoloring. I really wish that I had been into watercolor at the time that I went before. And clearly, clearly a skilled artist, especially with the architecture here. It's very accurate, but still loose with the watercolor itself, which is really awesome. And I kind of like to have source books like this from different artists to first to get color palette ideas from, and also sort of to get style ideas from. I don't necessarily want to copy any particular artists, but I do want to see what kind of effects I can get with watercolor. Like here with the water, you can see that there was basically a flat wash put under, and then he layered over with a darker blue, and then there's clearly some purple in here. So it's trying to determine, how they did it, and things that I can use and adapt to my own style. Like here, like how the leaves are depicted is really kind of neat. Clearly there was some sort of specialty brush that he was using, or just a rough brush to kind of dab for the leaves. And like here, I find this kind of thing so interesting, where you have just like little zigzags for the leaves. These are more Italy, I believe. But I think it's nice that he felt like he had the, here's a detail of this one here, but he really felt like he had the freedom to kind of use different methods. Like here, sort of a dry brush technique here, instead of just trying to replicate the scene exactly. Yeah, and that's beautiful. These magnolias, and these were gourds on a tree. Just so pretty. The use of color is also really, really amazing here. Basically showing you that you can go bold and it'll still look somewhat realistic. So these are some desert scenes here. People portraits. Oh, so these are oil. I mean, he's an amazing artist just all around, but it's so nice to have the watercolor as a reference. And I think a lot of artists used to kind of use watercolor as sort of a starting point for before they began an oil painting, to sort of do like a quick sketch and get colors down. But I mean, part of why I like it is that, you know, it's so expressive, because there is sort of this additional element of, you know, I'm trying to get it down so that I can then do something else. I was reading in the book that he didn't feel like he wanted to do any kind of show of his watercolors, because he kind of thought the watercolors were just like, oh, you know, the watercolors aren't that important. But like here, I mean, you can totally tell that this woman is wearing a white dress, but there's so much color in this dress, even though it's white. And this is something that, like all the different details in the fabric, I mean, they're kind of chunky, but if you look at it from far away, it definitely evokes fabric. So these are kind of things that I like to look at and see how I can emulate them. And again, more fabric. This is another oil painting. And what I find interesting too is I don't do much painting of actual people, just because that's not really a subject that I like painting. But what is kind of interesting is seeing what colors were used for skin tones. So that's also interesting, because here you have like some purple in there with the skin tone, so it's really interesting, and yet it looks realistic. Now that's a beautiful picture. Mountain landscapes, that's another thing. I'm really interested in painting mountain landscapes, and he did a lot of that, and it's very, very beautiful. And I love how sort of, so in the front, and this is sort of a method of, you know, things in the front have more detail, whereas things further away are more, have less detail. And you can definitely tell that here. And there's a lot of beautiful wet work back here. And then here you have a lot more lines and rough marks to indicate rocks. It's just, it's gorgeous. And here, this is another good illustration of retaining your whites for the mountains. It looks like he may have used some sort of resist here to retain the white. And here's all this water, which is also very interesting. Yeah, I was going to say, that's an oil. That's not watercolor. You can kind of tell. You can get, yeah, this one's oil too. Because you can get, you know, a depth of color that I think you probably can't get in watercolor. It'd be kind of hard to emulate. And these are just rock shapes from this quarry. So interesting. And, you know, I bet this quarry was a lot more monotone than he made it out to be. And with all this dynamic brushwork, you can really envision what it would look like to be there. Clothes hanging on a line. I mean, this is the beginning of the 1900s. There definitely was a movement towards, capturing more everyday life scenes as opposed to posed things. Mountain fire. Beautiful. And this actually has very little detail, but it looks detailed just because of the way that the paint was put down. Pomegranates. Beautiful. Yeah, and here's some beautiful shadows on a building. Here's the detail of that. So it's very interesting to see what colors he chose for the shadows. And often you'll notice that it's not just one flat color. There's a lot of dynamic color play going on there. All right, so interesting. So I really just wanted to do a flip through for a couple of reasons. One, to show you this beautiful book of all of watercolors. I think the rest is just references. And we have one more back here. But also to emphasize, inspiration can come from other artists, and you can get methods and that sort of thing without necessarily copying that artist. This is definitely John Singer Sargent is definitely one of the most inspirational artists for me as far as watercolor goes. But there's all kinds of other artists that you can just do a Google search and find a whole bunch of different kinds of art. I wanted this particular book in book form just because I wanted to be able to see the textures a little bit better. Sometimes that's a little bit hard to do on the computer, but this particular collection is definitely a book that I would highly recommend. And because watercolor is kind of not necessarily marginalized, but viewed as sort of a lesser art overall, I think that there aren't as many compilations of people's watercolor works in books like this. But because Sargent was so prolific with watercolor, there's enough to have a whole book, and there's probably enough interest to have a whole book. But that's all I had for you today, so feel free to subscribe to keep track of future videos. If you enjoyed this video, give it a like. This is only my second flip through of a book on the channel. I'll put a link to the book down below, but if you'd like to see more flip throughs, I do actually have an idea to do some more flip throughs of some other books that I find really inspirational as far as instruction books, both for watercolor and mixed media and that sort of thing. So let me know what you think of that. And I hope to see you next time. But in the meantime, have a great day. Thanks so much. Bye.